Good morning, this is Angela with Parco's Permaculture. It is a stunningly beautiful August morning. The air has that crispness in it that foretells the impending transition to fall, and yet it's sunny and warm and just a gorgeous time to be out in the garden. I really love soaking up these last weeks of summer before we move into the rain and the fall harvest, things like that. So I'm out in the backyard today and I'm working on doing some late summer pruning. We've had hot weather and then some rain, and that results in a giant flush of growth in the garden. My chickens can hear me. They know I'm out here, so they're gonna grumble until I come down and give them a treat. So today I wanted to expand upon a topic that I made a video about recently, which is nature fluency, and how important it is that we as gardeners learn to read the language of the garden and of plants. So let's talk today about nature fluency a little bit more in depth, and why it's so important to have it as a gardener, why it's so important to know what our plants are communicating to us. I talked a little bit before about how that's crucial in terms of managing the landscape and knowing what to plant where and how to care for your plants. But today I want to go more in depth about why that is so important for understanding the food that we eat. And before I go out into the garden, I'm going to grab my trusty spider clearing stick, because it is that time of year where we have spiders in the garden everywhere, and I don't want to squish them, but I also don't love getting a face full of spiders. So I think this is where in a garden and as a gardener, it's really important to be educated and to understand what your plant is communicating to you about ripeness. Because the reality is, if we're eating fruit is produced by the plant to be eaten. It is a seed dispersal mechanism. So it is a mutually beneficial relationship between you and the plant. It is giving you sugar, carbohydrates, and you in exchange are dispersing the seeds and helping it reproduce. So if you understand that mechanism, you know that fruit crops are not going to be palatable until the seed inside is mature and able to withstand the digestive tract of whatever is meant to be eating it, right? And you have to also understand that if that plant is not made to be eaten by humans, the fruit may not be edible for humans. It is only going to be edible for, or may only be edible for, the kinds of plants that, the kinds of animals that that plant wants to be consuming and dispersing its seeds, right? The ones that it has evolved to use as a seed dispersal mechanism. And I think that that is something that really can throw people, because a big element of being a gardener is understanding when your food is ripe. And not only when it is ripe, but even more when it is actually even edible. Okay, so we're down in the orchard where it's quite overgrown this time of year because I am growing 40-something fruit trees on less than a quarter acre. The whole property is a quarter acre, including the footprint of the house. And so I rely on very close spacing of trees and diligent pruning in order to get food production. But that means in August, things are really tight. So I'm down in here looking at the medlar tree. You can see all of the fruit on this tree. So the medlar is Mespilus germanica. It is of the rose family, Rosaceae. And you can see the fruit here are these hard, rosehip looking brown fruit. And they are not edible in this form. In fact, if you ate them now, they would be incredibly astringent and give you a stomach ache. And this is something that I think is important for people to understand, is that you need to be able to read not only how to grow your plant, but how to harvest it and when to eat it. So the medlar requires picking, and then this fruit is set aside in a box. It's picked rock hard. set aside in a box for weeks and allowed to undergo a process called bledding, which is a controlled rot in which the fruit turns very mushy and soft like applesauce. And then it's edible and nutritious. But before that, it's not edible. So understanding the process of harvesting and maturation is critical to being able to enjoy the huge harvest of this fruit. If you want to know a little bit more about Mespelis germanica, you can look at my video on it. So let's move on to the next one. And I am tangled in a rose, so I'm going to carefully back up here. And let's go over here. So here's my next example. And that is my pears. Pears are another one where we need to be able to understand the language of the plant and how it needs to be harvested. Because right now it's rock hard, not edible. These are Seckel pears. I'm gonna get a bumper crop, but pears ripen from the inside out. And if you don't understand that about pears, understand the mechanism for their ripening, you will wait until it feels soft to the touch, right? Gives to the touch on the outside, and then when you go to eat it, it will be brown and mushy and rotten in the middle. So for pears, they have to be picked when rock hard and feel unripe, and then allowed to ripen off the tree in a controlled manner. And the way you know that the tree is ready to give up its fruit for storage and ripening off the tree is that this abscission layer here, where the fruit connects to the stem of the plant, the fruit, when you lift it, will come away easily. Even though it's not ready to eat yet, it is ready to pick. So, we've looked at the medlar, we've looked at the pear. Those are two classic examples of plants where you need to be able to read the language that the plant is communicating about when the fruit is ready to be picked. And then you also need the additional knowledge of understanding the mechanism by which it becomes edible for humans. I think that it's one thing, when we grow apples, everybody knows what a ripe apple looks like, feels like, tastes like. But some of these more unusual fruits, sometimes we need guidance. And even a plant may be a common one that we interact with a lot, but we may not have that knowledge because it's been lost. So I think that it's critical to understand that we not only have the time to observe and sit and watch in the garden, but we value good science. Permaculture is not anti-science. It's not hippie gardening. Permaculture is rooted in design and using our human understanding and our human skills to gain knowledge so that we can better interact with nature. So permaculture is not anti-science. And I think that having scientific literacy, understanding the chemical processes happening in our plants is crucial to being a good gardener. It doesn't mean that you have to be a botanist or have to be, have your PhD in biochemistry in order to be a gardener. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we can learn about the chemical processes that not only help us grow plants, but also help us understand when they are able to be consumed by humans safely. And I see in garden groups people being really afraid of certain plants, which might be common plants for them. But there is an element of fear and distrust because we don't know, right? So when we are ignorant, and again, I mean that in the best possible way, in a neutral way, simply don't have the knowledge and the learning. When we are ignorant, it's very easy to be afraid. For example, I grow potatoes, I grow tomatoes, I grow goji berries. None of those things have edible greens, and for some of those plants, the unripe fruit is toxic. Goji berry, you can't eat an unripe fruit. It will give you diarrhea and GI upset, make you feel real unwell. For a potato, you can't eat the fruit at all. because the fruit, which looks very much like a little cherry tomato, is rich in solanine and will also make you sick. So understanding what parts of the plant are edible is just as important as understanding when and how to pick them. For example, I used to grow an apricot. Apricots are very difficult to grow in my area organically because of all the fungal issues, so I no longer grow apricots. But when I did grow apricots, understanding that, I'm panning over this way because my apricot tree used to be right through here, and now I have 2 jujubes and a fig there instead. Understanding that apricots themselves are quite palatable, delicious, nutritious. But if you open up that seed and you eat the kernel inside, it's very rich in cyanogenic glycosides. And if you eat enough of them, they could kill you. So understanding that parts of the fruit may be edible and parts may not be. Just like we don't eat apple seeds because they contain cyanogenic glycosides. Don't want to eat those. Now, obviously, it would take a consumption of a lot of apple seeds before you got really ill. And I think, so we've covered understanding how and when to pick something and how to mature it or store it to get it to be edible. We've covered how to know which parts of the plant are edible. And then also understanding the dosage. So you eat enough of anything, it's going to have a toxic effect. So there's loads of plants, particularly medicinal plants, that are really good for you and have lots of good benefits in small quantities. You eat copious amounts, you could get sick. So I think that's an important thing when we talk in permaculture about diversity, valuing diversity. We value diversity in our diet and not overloading on one kind of fruit. And I would just encourage you all to embrace not only the power of observation in the garden, but the power of research and the power of inquisitiveness and saying, I don't know actually if that part of the plant is edible. You know what? I'm going to go research and find out a little bit more about the biochemistry. So I'm going to leave it off there. I want to come back and talk about another plant tomorrow that I have such strong feelings about. So please come back tomorrow. That falls into this group of needing to understand and have a base of knowledge when we go in to read the plants in the garden. But I'm going to leave off for there and I'm going to get some pruning done. I have, from this rain, all of my plum trees have thrown up water sprouts and they need to be pruned only when the weather is dry. So now is the time to do it. Plums shouldn't be pruned in rainy weather. So I got to make hay while the sun shines, but I will be back tomorrow on the same topic, expounding upon it because I think it's really important. Hope you all have a great rest of your day.